Howdy, my Hungering Slaughterbeast. It's me, Mansant, and my lovely co-host Levia today, coming at you with an incredible video that's going to perhaps be the most important Levia video you've ever seen. Now, this is aimed more at a beginner audience, so if you're a veteran Levia player, don't leave. I do suggest scroll forward to the pop quiz section of the video and please leave a comment. But for anyone else who's new and really intrigued by this hero and wants a deeper understanding of what she can do on the table, why you even should play her, what she can do that's so unique, and her potential going forward, then this is the video for you. And what I love to think that we all just love Levia because she's just so darn cute. I hear a lot at local game stores and online chatter that she's just so bad. Levia sucks, inconsistent, luck sack hero. Well, I'm going to dispel what of that I can today. So let's get started with the video. So the first thing to realize about brutes is that they have the best numbers in the game if we just look at it in a vacuum. But if you look at how these stats are balanced, it's all about these high numbers for additional costs, relying on a little bit of luck to really pull off anything too unfair. Now, Levia revolves around banishing cards from her graveyard as an additional cost, similar to how Reiner requires discarding cards for his big attacks. Now, this additional cost is countered by the fact that most of her cards have the blood debt keyword, which says you will be dealt damage for each blood debt in your Banish Zone. This means that as she banishes more cards to pay for her attacks, those cards in her Banish Zone can start to kill her. And if you don't keep banishing and turning off blood debt with Levia's hero ability, this is a play pattern that can cause you to live dangerously. Now, at certain points of the game, you really just can't afford to not turn off blood debt, meaning you can't really choose to just block out for full turns like some other heroes can, which can cause some tricky issues to really play this hero perfectly. Now, brutes are also a class that doesn't really have hit effects, meaning that our cards do like lots of damage, but that's about it. Now, the cool thing about being balanced around big numbers, though, is that you can pressure life totals very quickly if your opponent decides to not block you out, because, I mean, you're not threatening a hit effect, so just take the damage, right? But Levia, unlike Reiner, can more reliably present these both tall and wide attack turns, normally around 12 damage or so a turn, because it takes her less effort to play multiple attacks in a row, because she's going to be banishing from graveyard as compared to Reiner, who's going to require these cards from hand, and most of the time a max hand is only going to be 4 to 5. This means that Levia can go very aggressive, almost at an overwhelming rate. But remember, she needs to build up her graveyard first and has to manage her blood debt. She really just can't have it too easy. Now, the other thing about blood debt is that this means Levia can't really be a weapon-based hero because no current weapon in the game allows you to turn off blood debt. So that means you're going to use your weapons more in like a niche use case role than something you can realistically swing every turn. So that means you should choose your weapons based around when in the game you want to get the most value out of them. Now, one of the weapons she has access to is a great early game weapon in Ravenous Meat Axe. Ravenous Meat Axe lets you draw cards and discard cards, which can accelerate how many cards you get in your graveyard, which can let you go more aggressive earlier in the game. But it is a bit unreliable, so you normally don't see a lot of more veteran players using this. This tends to be like a training wheels type weapon that gets replaced later for probably Mandible Claws. Now, Mandible Claws are a fantastic weapon choice for Levia, mainly because they've got great use in the mid game and the late game. When comboed with cards like Blood Rush Bellow, you can present incredible amounts of damage because they will have go again with the discard cost from Blood Rush. Now, you don't have too many of these discard effects normally in your deck, so Mandible Claws doesn't have an infinite ceiling of value, but still, when you use them on a Blood Rush turn, especially in the mid game, you can have these incredible pivot turns with so much overwhelming damage that really puts you in the driver's seat. So these turns combined with what Levia can normally do with the rest of her kit can be really oppressive, but she still has more options, and that would be Hexagore. Now, I find Hexagore really fun to play with, but it is more of a late game card and a card that you can't realistically swing every turn, even though I'd love to think you can, and that's because Levia is going to need to turn off Blood Debt first, right? before she can swing with her weapon, because you don't want to just swing your weapon and then take damage equal to whatever's in your blood debt. So, excuse me one sec, my cat jumped on me. There we go. So while Hexagore is a great weapon because you get to pay 2 resources to swing for 6, you need to look at the entire turn you're going to have to play towards with a card like Hexagore. You will need to spend other cards and other resources turning off blood debt, and I mean, if it can go into a go again attack into your Hexagore, of course, that's amazing, but you normally don't see Hexagore too popular because it just requires a few too many things to line up to play perfectly. Now, as for her other equipment, Levia has access to Carrion Husk, which is fantastic both in Blitz and Classic Constructed because Carrion Husk blocks for 6 health. But the downside here is that it's going to banish itself once you use it, or if you miss your chance to use it. And it does have the Blood Debt keyword. So once it is in your Banish Zone, you are going to start take damage for every turn that it's there. But Levia can normally turn off Blood Debt every turn, which is fantastic because that lets you use Carrion Husk as early in the game as you want, or as late in the game as you want, because you are normally not going to have to deal with the Blood Debt trickle that a hero like Chain might have to contend with. Last thing to mention here would be Scabskin Leathers in terms of her really unique equipment pieces. And Scabskins, I mean, it's a card that Levia really can milk a ton of value out of. Rolling the dice with this card is another risk that you really have to learn to manage, because if anything, the decision trees that stem from this card can really get complicated. If you're always planning to use these extra action points, it can get really hard to know what to block with because you don't know if you'll get the extra action point or not. So I always try to use Scabskins in ways where I'm not ever being overly greedy with it. Normally my formula here is that if a Scabskin's action point would equal 4 or more attack going through this turn, then it's worth risking the roll. And Levia can do this very well because she has playable cards from her Banish Zone, which we'll get to in a bit. But the great thing about that is that if you have floating resources, then you might as well roll for the action point to try to get those resources to go into these playable cards from the Banish Zone. You don't actually have to commit more cards in hand to do that. So that's really one of the best use cases for this card. Now, what is straightforward about Levia is her incredibly high attack values. Now, take this with a grain of salt, but if we look at how Flesh and Blood is designed, attacks tend to be balanced around their vanilla equivalents, meaning cards like Wounding Blow, Brutal Assault, Raging Onslaught tend to be the standard values for cards at those costs. Most cards are really not going to be above this curve, but instead have trade-offs, being like less attack for a keyword or less block for a hit effect, something like that. But with Levia, her cards are consistently over the standard to begin with, but they have that additional cost of banishing 3. So we can make some pretty easy comparisons here. If we look at Brutal Assault, which is a 2 cost, 6 attack, block 3 in the red. Levia has Dread Screamer, 2 cost, 6 attack, block 3 in the red. And with the additional cost here, you can gain Go Again. And Go Again is a keyword that's really hard to measure the value of because it can present all kinds of different damage. But in Levia, we would hope that the Go Again is going to equal about another 6 damage, which is very, very relevant. We look at another example here with Raging Onslaught, 3 cost, 7 attack, block 3. Now Levia has Endless Maw, which yes is a base 6, but it is going to gain +3 if it hits on the Graveyard Banish. So that's coming in for all of a sudden 9 attack, which is far above the standard we're seeing here. So Levia just ends up having these stat and keyword advantages across her entire suite of cards pretty much, which is going to gain you massive value the more often you actually get to play them, right? It's incremental, but it'll all add up over time. However, this power does come at a huge cost, and it's arguably too high of a cost at all. Because if you look at what happens if you play an Endless Maw and just don't banish the 6 power from Grave, not only did you not gain the +3, but you also didn't turn off Blood Debt, right? Which means your aggressive play did not present the threat it should have, So your opponent gets to keep more cards in hand than you were hoping, and you're going to take blood debt, which can be hopefully negligible, but sometimes up to, 10s, 20s. Now, this is part of what makes Levia unfortunately not so competitive, because no other hero is doubly punished for things that you can't really control. I mean, you can control them, but only to a degree. So you can just end up losing these winning games out of nowhere because of this double punish, right? So yes, we get these incremental rewards, but as soon as one thing goes wrong, it all starts falling apart. Now, her damage ceiling can be really high, and we're going to get to that in a second, but it's gated by factors such as like the scab skins action points and random banish effects. So I get that she's kind of just a hard hero overall to balance, and I just really enjoy how she is in the game right now. But there are going to be frustrating moments, just to warn you. She gets this bad reputation for being a luck-based hero, but you don't have to play into the luck. You can try to be consistent, so we're going to go over that. Um, Now, Levia is a shadow hero, right? So this means she has access to some really interesting cards that are playable from Banish, which gives her more and more options as the game goes on. It's not as great as how like Chain can do it, because Chain is going to be banishing these, every turn, just more and more as the game goes on. But Levia is going to be banishing them from when she plays her cards. They are going to banish the cards that are in graveyard and then end up in Banish Zone, which makes them playable. So her aggressive suite of these kinds of cards would be something like Howl from Beyond, which is an amazing attack buff here. It lets you just sink 2 resources into +3 on the next attack, and that actually says next attack, not next shadow or brute attack. So potentially like something like even a Command and Conquer can come in for 9 from this thing, which is incredible. You've also got Ghostly Visit, which is another really strong one here because at 1 cost and 4 attack, you can slot this in at the end of some go again turns to just deal that cheeky bit of damage. And then of course we've got the Shadow Brute card in particular with Deep Rooted Evil. And this one's a bit trickier to play because it doesn't block, so you're going to have to get it into the Banish Zone some other way. But it is coming in for 6 at the cost of 3 resources. And the big thing to note about this one is that getting another 6 power back into your graveyard means that you have better odds of hitting 6s when you need to play your next Shadow Brute attack. So this one's, debatably a little bit overcosted, but it is very strong for the consistency it adds to Levia. Then if we look at some of her more toolbox options here, she's got Guardian of the Shadow Realm, which is a defense reaction, which you can recur from the Banished Zone, but the action doesn't have Go Again, so it's not always as useful as you'd hope. You've got Tome of Torment, which is free to just draw a card that you can play out of your Banished Zone, but it also doesn't block, so you're in this predicament of how to get it in your Banished Zone to begin with, and it also doesn't have Go Again, so you're going to need these extra action points to draw. Then you've also got Mutated Mass, which is a blue pitch, which is nice, but it also, once again, doesn't really block, so I tend to not favor Mutated Mass as highly as Ghostly, because at least with Ghostly, you can just block, and it makes it a lot easier to play. So really, if you like any of these cards, be it the aggressive suite or the more toolboxy suite, my advice is to just go ahead and run at least 2 copies of the cards you really want to be playing from your Banish Zone. That way you're going to be more likely to draw them, get them engraved, and then banish them. And the easiest way to get them engraved, like I said, was to just block with them, which is what makes it trickier to actually get stuff like Mutated Mass and Tome of Torment and Deep Rooted Evil where you want them. Now, there is a card that can do this for you, which is Shadow of Blasmaphet, but I have some strong opinions about how bad this card is, so not to rant too long on it, but Shadow of Blasmaphet in a perfect world is going to, in those early turns when you don't really have much going on, help you play Shadow of Blasmaphet, draw a card, discard a card, fill your graveyard, also search out a Blood Debt card, banish it, set you up for later in the game. That all sounds good, right? But that is only if you see it on those early turns, because it's really not versatile at all. That's because it doesn't block. It's also a red pitch, so you can't, if you see it in your hand and don't really want to use it, you can't really use it as pitch. It's also a random draw discard effect, so you can miss, and sometimes with Levia, discarding cards is a really big deal because she's got some really good power cards you don't want to see go away, which we will actually get to in a second, but namely like Doomsday, Art of War, Blood Rush Bellow. It's also not a very high threat card because at 2 resource cost and 6 attack, yes, it's like the standard rate, but that's probably all your turn is going to be, is just you kept 2 cards to play it, and threatening 6 is really not that great. Plus, you're kind of forced to play it because, right, it doesn't block, so it kind of has to be your play. Going hand with that, yep, bad 2-card hand because what I just said, it's only good early. And then the other weird part about how this card works is that it doesn't automatically turn off Blood Debt just by banishing something. You do still have to banish a 6-power attack to turn off Blood Debt for the turn. So in those early turns, if you try to search out like a Ghostly Visit, Howl from Beyond, Mutated Mass, whatever it is, your Blood Debt is not going to be turned off by that, so you will take a little bit of damage. The only thing that is going to turn off Blood Debt that you can search out is Deep-Rooted Evil. So later in the game, if you're using these cards to try to turn off Blood Debt, that's really your only target that's useful at all, other than just pulling out some other 6-power card. So I'm just not a huge fan of this card. Don't want to rant about it too much, but my advice here would be try to stay away from playing this in your Levia builds and just up the count of the playables that you like. You know, I really am a big fan of running like 2 Ghostly Visits, 2 Deep-Rooted Evil, 2 Howl from Beyond, something like that. And then moving on here, like there really is insane value to be gained from some of these cards. Like people complain about Chain and how he gets to recycle these Blood Debt cards with stuff like Unhallowed Rites, and yet we've got Levia who can, in theory, endlessly play some of these cards to just buff and gain value forever. So one of the most unique things this is one of the most unique things about her, and it's why I really enjoy playing her, is because you have to manage not only your hand, arsenal, deck, all the normal stuff, but also your graveyard and your Banish Zone. She takes a long time to play perfectly because you're really trying to squeeze as much damage possible from the resources you have in hand using cards both in hand and in graveyard. And that makes her pretty tricky to play. So in an ideal late game scenario, one of my favorite things to set up is a graveyard that's full of just 1 6-power attack, which you're going to have because it will have cleared whatever else was in your graveyard and then go to grave itself. So you'll have that 1 card in graveyard, 2 Howl from Beyond in your Banish Zone. You'll play them, put you at 3 cards total into your Banish Zone, and then play a new attack that then banishes these 3, and then you can repeat this loop endlessly. And this is one of the most amazing power plays late game versus these control decks like Oldhim, Dash, Bravo, because they just cannot stop the amount of pressure that is. I mean, you're looking at minimum 12 damage, which in a late game scenario, their full hand is probably only going to block 12. But you can start hitting even above that if your turns get better, if your attack is like an Endless Maw, or if you have Go Again with a Dread Screamer, whatever it is. So in these late game scenarios, this is one of the game states I really try to chase because it is just fantastic and you'll have so much fun just never missing Blood Debt if you can get this loop going. So moving on to Levia's more dream hands, power cards, one of the things to really touch on here would be Mandible Claws with Blood Rush, which I mentioned back at the beginning, but this is the kind of card that really deserves a little bit extra explanation, and that's because Levia needs something to really break her math above just doing 12 damage a turn. Because in theory, your opponent will be able to just always choose to block 12 a turn if they want. Most cards in the game block for 3. Your opponent has 4 cards, that's 12 block total. So the way you really win games with Levia is that you need something that pushes math over the top. Because if your opponent just decides to block you out every turn, in theory you will run out of cards in graveyard to use as additional cost for your attacks, and then you'll just start killing yourself to Blood Debt. So you can't let that happen. You need to include stuff like this, which is Blood Rush Bellows with the Mandible Claws package. So what Blood Rush is going to do with Mandible Claws is bump up your 12 damage turns to potentially something like this. So this is truly like a God hand scenario, but it has happened to me once, and I'll never forget it because it was so incredible. What you need is a full 5-card hand with a Deep-Rooted Evil and Banished. 2 of those cards in hand need to at least be a Blood Rush Bellows and a Beast Within, which is its own little fun combo. But what you can do is play Blood Rush. Blood Rush has to discard Beast Within. Beast Within must then trigger and draw you either a blue 6 or a red Dread Screamer. Then with the rest of the cards in your hand, one of them has to at least be another Dread Screamer and the rest all have to be blues. Then you can go Mandible Claws, into Red Dread Screamer, into Dread Screamer, into Deep Rooted Evil for 34 damage off a 5-card hand. That's just the upper limits, right? That's probably never going to happen, but it's amazing to know that that's all enabled by a card like Bloodrush Bellows. If we look at what's more realistic, we've got the kind of standard Bloodrush hand, which is just going to be from 3 cards, being a 6 attack to discard, Bloodrush, and a blue. You can play Bloodrush, discard the 6 power, draw into another blue and perhaps a Boneyard Marauder or some other attack, and then just swing Claw, Boneyard Marauder, and just that is 18 damage off of 3 cards. So these are the kind of like math-breaking scenarios that is really important to have in your deck when trying to play against some of these control decks, because you have this unlimited value with stuff like Howl from Beyond, but you still need the math-breaking parts of your deck, right? So the next thing that can do that for you would be Art of War, which is another very powerful card for building your Levia decks, and that's because Art of War combines really well with cards like Graveling Growl. Art of War has a bunch of modes that are actually pretty useful for Levia, but you tend to pick Banish and Attack to draw to, and you tend to pick the Go Again. So Art of War can banish a card. If it's a Deep Rooted Evil or a Ghostly Visit, even better. And then with the Go Again on your next attack, you can start stringing together these super efficient turns, have Go Agains that kind of once again break the math of being able to do like Graveling Growl into a Dread Screamer into another Graveling Growl or whatever it is. Art of War is just an extra source of Go Again that enables these super efficient attacks. I mean, a 1 cost for 7 is incredible, but you do have to fit that condition. So the more cards that can fulfill that condition, the better in your deck. One of the best parts rather about Levia personally is her card Doomsday. Absolutely love this card. It was the first legendary I pulled, and this card is just fantastic. The only time you really don't want to see it is right in the beginning of the game, but what this card is going to do for you is give you another safety net, and Levia loves her safety nets because she's a hero that can really live or die on some variants, which that is once again kind of the downfall of the hero. But Plasmafet is going to fix that for you. Because what he does is lets you attack and then banish a shadow card from your hand. And if it's a 6-power suite, you just turned off Blood Debt. Now what this means for your game plan is that you get to all of a sudden block with 3 cards from hand and still turn off Blood Debt. Normally you can never do that. Normally you need to only block with 2 cards, keep 2 cards because you need an attack to play and a card to pitch. But Plasmafet is going to say, all of a sudden the only thing I need you to do is keep 1 shadow card for me, I'll eat it, turn off Blood Debt. So that's incredible because it can gain you a ton of value if all of a sudden you're still swinging 6 for 1 card and your opponent's swinging into you and you're blocking probably 9 with 3 cards. That value trade will always win you the game. So versus an aggro deck, when you see this guy really earlier in the game and are able to play him, fantastic, because they will have to kill him or you're just going to start winning that value trade. And so in that case, he kind of buys you 6 extra life. He's like an extra carrion husk. Now later in the game, versus control decks or something when you really have them on the back foot and you're just swinging hard turn after turn after turn, summoning a Plasmafet can be really tricky for them to deal with because all of a sudden you're forcing them to keep cards that will deal at least 6 damage to kill Plasmafet, otherwise he's going to stick around forever. And since his attack costs 0, you can potentially start rolling Scab Skin Leathers, gain extra action points, and just break the amount of damage a control deck can handle. So he's just an all-around amazing card. Fortunately, you can only run one of it, but another huge reason to play Levia. And then one of my favorite parts about Levia's playstyle in general, and if you've seen my other videos, I talk about this quite a bit, is that Levia has some of the best 2-card hand math in the game, meaning that from 2 cards, ideally, always a blue pitch and then one of these combos I'm showing you, you are going to deal just more damage mathematically than other decks are really balanced around. So like an Endless Maw, being able to pitch a blue to swing for 9 is insane. You just spent 2 cards to deal 9 damage, which is normally the going rate of about 3 cards or so. You've got Dread Screamer, which when you pitch a blue, you can hopefully follow it up with a Ghostly Visit from Banish, presenting 10 damage for only 2 cards in your starting hand, which once again is just an amazing rate. So these cards, these combinations actually carry Levia's early game quite a bit when you're in that pattern of trading with 2-card blocks and swinging back with 2 cards. The more combinations of these cards you have, the better, because that's all that incremental damage I've been talking about that will then get you in the winning position to just take the game away. Welcome to all of you that skipped to this part of the video for the little pop quiz here. But what I've put together, I think, is a pretty interesting scenario that really will teach us all about the play lines that Levia has and kind of how to assess risk of each play. So if we look at the scenario on screen here, what we've got is a Nothos coming in for 6. That's because Bravo's pitched to make a Seismic Surge and then pitch another card, so a Nothos swinging in for 6. We're going to assume that we both have about 30 HP, so a life threshold that doesn't really mean anything. We've got 2 non-6s in the graveyard, 1 6 attack. We've got the Mandible Claws equipped. We've got Scabskins and Gambler's Gloves. And then in our hand, we have an Endless Maw red, Art of War, Wrecker Romp blue, a blue Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell, and no Arsenal. And then finally, in our Banish Zone, we have 4 Blood Debt total, 2 of which are playables, a Howl from Beyond and a Ghostly Visit. So I've got a couple different lines of play I want to talk through here that are going to show off kind of the different amounts of risk you can take with each of your plays, which is going to be interesting, I think, because this is why Levia can get such a bad rep for being a high variance hero, which is true. You can lean into variance or you can play some of the lower risk things. So if we look at the first option here, we have what I would consider a no-risk play. And real quick, when we go through all these, just remember, drop in the comments which play line you personally would take. I'll also pin a comment of what I think I would have gone for in the comments as well, so look for that. But what we've got here is the no-risk line. So what we've done is blocked with Wrecker Romp for 3, so we've only taken 3 damage, and then we're going to pitch a blue Convulsions from the Bellows of Hell to play Endless Maw coming in for 9. This also allows us to arsenal the Art of War, and really just has no variance, nothing's left up to variance with this play, because we're going to have cleared out everything in our graveyard to the point where we know we won't miss. Next line of play here would be the low risk play, but you know, still something that's going to be left up to randomness. That's going to be, we take the entire Nothos hit, so we take 6, and then what we do is pitch 2 blues, one of which to play the Howl from Banish, the next to play the Endless Maw. So with this line, the risk is that now you have 3 banishes that could miss in your graveyard and only 1 hit. So if you get unlucky, then this is only going to come in for 9, but if you get lucky, this is coming in for 12, and once again, it leaves you with the Art of War in Arsenal. The next line of play is pretty much like a medium risk play because you're going to start your turn with rolling Scabskins. Now, if Scabskins gets you this extra action point, then this is going to unlock another 4 damage guaranteed for you because with the extra action point, you're going to be able to play the Endless first, clear out all those cards in graveyard, to then play with your second blue a Howl from Beyond and a Ghostly Visit. So if you hit that 2 points on Scabskins, this is guaranteed 16 damage you can present with nothing left up to variance in the graveyard, and it's going to refill your grave with the Endless, Howl, and Ghostly at the end of your turn and leave you with the ability to arsenal Art of War. Still medium risk though, because if Scabskins rolls only 1 action point, or perhaps even a 1, obviously you don't get this play off. You'll have to revert back to the other play with the Howl and Endless. Then what we've got here is what a higher risk play looks like, where you're going to take the 6 damage from a Nothos to be able to play Art of War, pitching the blue Convulsions. You're going to banish the Wrecker Romp, say draw 2 and go again, and at minimum you know that you'll be swinging in for 13 damage because you've got the Endless Maw plus the Ghostly Visit that you can probably play off the go again with what you draw. This is high risk though, because by banishing with the Art of War and drawing 2 random cards, you're not entirely sure how that's going to change your plan. You're not sure if you're going to end up with something key for Arsenal or what. And perhaps you even draw 2 reds, which would mean you have to pitch both of them to get off your Endless Ghostly Visit play. And then what we've got here is the huge risk play, which is go ahead, block the Anothos for a bit, and then play the Art of War, pitch the Convulsions, banish the Wrecker Romp, and just hope and pray that you draw playables off of the Art of War. You'll at least have the Ghostly Visit into Claw as an available play, but you really don't know much more beyond that. So with going over those plays there, once again, just leave a comment below with what play line you think you'd go through. I'll flash through these real quick again. We've got the huge risk, the high risk, the medium risk, the low risk, and the no risk. And I think these are all very different play lines you can go with Levia. I don't think any of them are objectively wrong, but it really speaks to the different ways you can play this hero and the different amount of variance you want in your turns. So let's get back to the rest of it. So the next thing to talk about here is just kind of choosing Blitz or CC, or what play styles are different among the two. And that is that in Blitz, Levia is honestly severely underrated. She has access to really, really strong equipment in Blitz because of Carrion Husk, Scabskin Leathers, and Skullcap are potentially putting you at 32 life, right? Which is just incredible for that format. However, because of the aggressive nature of Blitz, you are normally forced to go the more aggressive route with your build. You're going to want to play Mandible Claws with Blood Rush so that you can actually kind of end games quickly before the Blood Debt catches up with you. Because that is the bigger problem with Levia in Blitz, being that you're going to have to constantly turn off Blood Debt because with a life pool that's so small, every bit of Blood Debt you take is a higher percentage of your life. So if you get unlucky or just make one really sloppy play, you just lose the game. That said, she's still a lot of fun in Blitz, and actually, like I said, severely underrated, so you'll catch a lot of people by surprise if you take her to an event. But then in CC, you're much more open to playing aggressive with Mandible Claws or more of a longer game with Hexagore, whatever you want. And because of the sideboard, you can craft really specialized strategies against all different kinds of matchups. And I think this is where Levia really shines as a hero. But you're always going to have to tinker around with your build to get her to fit your playstyle. Me personally, I really love the Mandible Claw aggressive playstyle, but by including some of the playable from Banish cards, you're put in these scenarios where finding the highest damage line with the lowest risk taken can be just a really big challenge. But if you make these correct decisions turn after turn, there's a lot of payoff up until you just miss Blood Debt and then probably lose the game. But, if that doesn't happen, you're a great deck. So the main playstyle similarity between both these different formats is going to be that Levia is a hero that once you start attacking, you really can't stop. That's by nature of her banishing cost, filling up her Banish Zone with Blood Debt, all that. Once you choose to go aggressive, you just can't stop. So that is something that takes a ton of time to find the perfect moment for. And I implore you, when you play games as Levia, think before that first attack and really decide, is this turn going to be a good payoff for this one exchange of damage, or is it going to put me in a pickle because next turn I'm now on the back foot to find enough cards to put in graveyard to continue the threat, and then my opponent just actually did win the damage trade because they were able to block out and I'm taking Blood Debt. It's really tricky to time that right, and it's really not as straightforward as, oh, I have 6 cards in my graveyard, let's just start going aggressive. It is hard to make that decision, and sometimes you just start going aggressive even when you hit that exact 3 cards in your graveyard. It's very contextual, and it's always up to your best judgment here, but that's one of the trickiest parts about playing Levia well, I'd say. You can have fun, you can play her to death, but to play her really well is finding your right openings to make your big pivot turn exchange. And my big tip here would be wait for Blood Rush Bellows. That's a good card. I think we all know. But there are some problems with Levia, and that is her playstyle is super telegraphed because you just can't stop attacking, right? Especially if your Blood Debt has built up to the point where, anywhere more than 3 or 4, you should probably always focus on turning that off. Otherwise, the damage you start to take is just that much more of a percentage of your life total. So your opponent can see this. They can track that that's what you want to do. And some of these slower decks can just decide to stop attacking you for a bit and let you clear out your graveyard until you're really in a bind. So one issue there. She's also got the deck building restriction that all the other brutes do as well, with the 6 power attack requirement. Right now, she has quite a decent pool, but she is limited in that, it's not a fully fleshed out pool yet. There's still supplemental sets to come, and we are lacking in some certain colors of cards that'd be really nice, such as more blue 6 options. So there's that you have to contend with. There's also the fact that you need enough cards that will turn off Blood Debt, and you need enough cards that will not be misses for Blood Debt as well, right? So you can't just always put in, oh, I want defense reactions, let me just put them all in, because those are now misses for when you try to turn off Blood Debt. So she's really tricky to balance right there. The Blood Debt threat, as I went over, obviously super prevalent. You are constantly under this pressure to just not lose the game to yourself, which is really interesting. It's super stressful, but it will just happen. I normally say around every 5th game or so that you just die to yourself, and it's gonna feel terrible, and your opponent's gonna feel really good about themselves. But just know that you'll beat them next time. It doesn't happen every game. It really shouldn't. The other problem with Levia is that a lot of her card suite has a lot of non-blocks, and non-blocks really are bad for Levia because of how you want to fill your graveyard early. Now, a lot of her non-blocks tend to be cards like Deadwood Rumbler or Shadow Plasmafet that are cards you actually want to play early game, but the balance there of not having too many in your deck, but also having enough that you even see them early game can just get really hard to do correctly because there's just the randomness of what you draw. So I'm just not a huge fan of the non-blocks in general. Then you've also got the fact that Levia has one of specialization cards, which can lead to some really skewed games. Some games you find Doomsday on like that exact perfect time. Some games you just never see it, and some games it's in your hand so early that it's just a detriment. So that's a little unfortunate that she just doesn't have that consistency of being able to do what she wants with Plasmafet every game, but so be it. It's not as bad as Chain, who if he banishes his Soul Reaping is in for just a completely different game. Our Soul Harvest, luckily, isn't that important. But Doomsday is. Doomsday definitely is. And then the another thing here is that Levia really just is a hero who has a lot of damage going for her, and that's about it. She's not this intricate control hero. She's not this hero that's going to force a lot of interaction with hit effects. She's just a hero that deals a lot of damage and can also play like a two-phase game plan of blocking a bit and then going aggressive. So if her damage just isn't the best in format, there's unfortunately like no reason to play her competitively because she will always be worse than the other heroes that deal comparable or better damage because she's also just under threat of losing to herself. So if we look at the current format right now, as an example with the Briar decks that are out there, Levia just tends to be a similar deck that is just under pressure to self-kill at any moment. So that's why you see more competitive players straying away from her, but of course we can have fun with her, we can still win games. I think she's still really good. And then the other part here is that the random effects that she has in her kit are pretty much only punishing rather than rewarding. Like I showed you with the Endless Maw example, she just needs to hit her banish effects to have like a consistent game. But the moment she misses on those random effects, it is a massive, massive thorn in your side. If you roll your scab skins and it's a 1 and you re-roll it into a 1, you probably just lost the game because you've taken blood debt, you've lost tempo. It's horrible. If you miss on the banish 3s, same thing. You didn't get the value that the card should have had, and you're going to take blood debt damage. It really hurts there. So she's not a perfect hero by any means, but she's definitely lots of fun, right? We should all know that at this point. And then finally looking forward into Levia and like the future of her card design, I actually have quite a bit of hope here because she has a little bit of these unexplored spaces that I think could be really strong in cementing her whole kit as something that's really, really something competitively viable. And that's going to be stuff like Hexagore. If we look at how Hexagore has a condition here, it wants you to have 6 cards with Blood Debt in your Banish Zone to then reap some kind of benefit. This is also similar to Doomsday. Doomsday requires 6 cards to even be played. So if we look at more cards that could potentially be in that space, these really high payoff cards that just require a commitment to Blood Debt, I think that could be really, really cool for Levia's space because as of now, there's really not much of a reward for playing so much Blood Debt stuff. Now you have to because that's her card pool and that's what makes her unique in any capacity. But there's really not the huge payoff. It's just kind of what she does. So more cards like Hexagore and Doomsday, I think would be really, really cool for her. And then we've also got what I mentioned with the non-blocks. They tend to be these cards that have the draw discard effects, which are good in the instance that in the early game you want to fill up your graveyard. So this is a way to do that. But Deadwood Rumbler does something really special that I think Levia could really use more of, and that's banishing a specific card in her graveyard. So if there were more options like that, maybe some middle of the road cards, stats wise, that just had a different cost of banishing perhaps just one card you choose. I think that would be fantastic and not too overly oppressive because you'd have to make the choice, do I want to banish a 6 to turn off Blood Debt, or is this a turn where I can banish my misses to make my turns better later in the game? I think that would really help her manage her graveyard to the point where it's not just random luck all the time. And that would be, I think, my biggest wish for this next supplemental set going forward, some cards that exist in this space. So that's it for this video, guys, but I really hope you enjoyed it. I realized on my channel I don't really have like an introduction to Levia and what makes her unique and special and all that, so this video is just here to fill this gap, and also I think a great video if you're new to the game and thinking about playing Levia at all. So if you know anyone like that, please pass it around. Once again, though, big shout out to my co-host Levia here. She's been with us the whole video, and with that, I will see you in the next one.